thanks everybody for turning up. 4 o'clock, most of you in Australia. Some of you might be a bit earlier or later. In fact, probably a bit later if you are in New Zealand, like last time. So welcome and thank you for being here. And thank you to those from the last webinar who reached out with some questions. It was lovely to touch base and be able to answer them for you. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this country where we are meeting today. This webinar is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, part of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and Aboriginal elders and other communities who may be here today. I also extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. Okay, last goal is similar to this goal, which is designed to support your work in helping your students grow from writing words to sentences. And this time we're looking at simple narratives using texts many of you use every day that you already have access to in your classrooms. I'm going to structure the agendas in a similar way. There's a lot on background knowledge again today, and we'll be looking at the science of writing. Background knowledge, we're looking at the models of writing and reading as a snapshot, but this time we're going to unpack different components, being executive functioning skills and also working memory. In the finding out for science of writing, we'll look at the science of teaching narrative writing. And then I'm going to again sort it out using the framework of SRSD as a model, self-regulated strategy development. And then going further, I'm going to show you a couple of decodables that I might use as a writing prompt, as a worked example. And then I've taken another text to develop an example to teach modeled narrative writing. Okay, let's get started with what do we need to know and do and understand about the science of reading to understand the science of writing. There's quite a lot in this presentation, so I will be moving at a little bit of a pace to squeeze this in, and it'll be more than 45 minutes. It'll be probably closer to an hour this time. So in the last presentation, I mentioned this research paper that's up the top here called It All Starts Here, Fixing Our National Writing Crisis. And this came out in about 12 or 13 years ago by the researcher Steve Graham. And most of what I'll be presenting today is either Steve Graham's research or Karen Harris in related to self-regulated strategy development. Essentially, what I wanted to reinforce here is that the outcome of this research was to say that we need to know and understand the cognitive processes as well as the linguistic processes that underpin skilled reading and writing. And the main takeaway is we've got to teach them together. And we know we teach skills in isolation at times, but we've really got to integrate reading and writing and teach it together as with purpose and intention. So again, I'm going to touch base on the models of reading so we can make those connections to the model of writing. If you were in the last webinar, I talked about this a little bit in the last one. I'm looking at it from a slightly different perspective this time. I'll start by saying that with the simple view of reading, we've got good comprehension, which can be listening comprehension and reading comprehension, versus poor linguistic comprehension. And we have good decoding versus poor decoding. And decoding could even be sounding out the words and then segmenting, blending with the decoding, and also word recognition once you've got the decoding to sight. Okay, where this little dot is up the top here, this is a little group. I'm now grouping my students by their ability. This group has got great decoding and comprehension. This next group has got some good, reasonable decoding. There's a bit of a match, but maybe need a little bit more work on comprehension. This group here has some difficulties with decoding and has, okay, it's not significantly bad, comprehension, but it definitely needs work. This is another group that's got poor decoding and poor comprehension. And over here, there's a couple of kids that have good decoding, but weaker comprehension. So for me, this is, again, a standard, any class in any year group, you could plot kids using this viewpoint about what do I need to teach and how do I need to adjust my teaching and target certain components, and in what way am I going to do that. Breaking down this model a little bit more, we've got the reading rope, and the reading rope breaks down comprehension and language comprehension into more components. You can see we've got background knowledge, which is essential to comprehension, vocabulary, and within vocabulary here, we've got the breadth of vocab, language structures, we've got syntax and semantics. So thinking about reading and writing connections, syntax is also what we look at when we talk about grammar and sentence construction in written expression. We've got our verbal reasoning and our thinking about what we've been reading. And we've also got our literacy knowledge, our concepts of print, and knowledge of genres as well. In word recognition, we've got our what do we need to know and understand to break down decoding here. So we've got to have a good foundation of phonological awareness and phonemic awareness skills, and decoding and knowledge of the alphabetic principle, that letters represent sounds and that letters can be put together to represent one speech sound, and even one letter can represent multiple speech sounds. That's the principle of the alphabet, and also that there are rules that govern where these letters are placed in words. Similarly, we have the simple view of writing, and in the simple view of writing, we have transcription skills, which is handwriting and spelling, as well as keyboarding. We have our working memory, which I will unpack in a bit more detail today, executive functioning skills, so that we can compose and write. Similarly, we have the writing rope that then further breaks that down. And again, you can see that this model here, just like the simple view of model, really looks at things from a cognitive psychology perspective. When I'm thinking about planning a unit of writing, I might not be thinking about working memory, because over here, there's a lot more over here that I can use to structure and plan my scope and sequencing for writing over a curriculum and term. They have different functions and they provide us with different information. What I do like about this is the way it breaks down the critical thinking, syntax, and text structure, which is where we get into our genre writing, and today looking at narrative, as well as our craft. You know, what decisions have we made about word choice and why? Awareness of task, audience, and purpose, and also the use of literary devices. And as well, we've got here that transcription skills of spelling and handwriting. So looking at this, we've looked at, we know that transcription skills multiplied by ideation give us our written expression. And in order to, we as teachers kind of know this, we know we've got to be able to write and spell and put ideas together to be able to write. But some of the things that I think that we're starting to learn and understand a lot more now is the importance of our knowledge and understanding of how the memory works, and also executive functioning. So I'm going to break down working memory a little bit more today. Let's have a look at the brain and what working memory does. Essentially, the goal of working memory is to process new information and then use it. Okay, so when you're problem solving. There's two main parts of working memory that we need to have a knowledge and understanding of. One is the auditory memory. So we hear something and we process what we hear, and we can break that right down to that phonological loop, because it's coming through the auditory nerve, and there's a phonological component which is related to speech. And what is our brain doing? It's recording what we hear. So when I'm speaking right now, you are processing what I am saying. You are also looking at the screen and processing the visual information, and you are recording that. And you're making connections to, oh, yep, okay, I know that, that makes sense, or oh, that's interesting, or maybe it's new information. Now, I was thinking earlier today as I did a bit of a practice of this, you know, at the beginning of the day when you get ready for school and you might cut up some fruit or you eat an apple, you might have an apple. If you don't eat that apple by the end of the day, you'll notice that your apple tends to go a little bit brown, okay? The same thing happens if we don't use the information in our working memory. So if we don't use it, it just decays, it just goes. Your brain wants to be efficient, so it'll get rid of anything that you're not using. And this is really important for us as teachers in curriculum design to make sure that we know when we're reviewing information and then how much we need to review something. Now let's look at what this means as far as transfer from working memory into long-term memory. Okay, so once we've got the information stored from working memory, it's either going to go into long-term memory, and and then it's going to come back out, and we will retrieve information when we need it. So the sort of information that we store, we've got information that we store so we can comprehend, so we can sequence information, and also so we can categorize information. A really good example to test this in terms of language skills is asking students to name as many of something in a minute. Animals are really good to do because kids know about animals. And if you ask them to name as many animals as they can, you'll notice that children that start categorizing the animals will be able to recall more. So once they might say lion, then they might go tiger, leopard, and they'll keep going with more words that they can categorize together. Okay, for once we give them information and then they retrieve that, if I mention something to you right now, like lions and tigers, for example, you retrieve that straight out of your long-term memory, you visualize it, and you are able to attend to that and think about that. So that's the main reason where that information goes, and then it goes into your working memory so you can use it. You'll also use things to follow directions so that you'll retrieve from your long-term memory. Like going, when you drive, you have information in your long-term memory about where you go when you're driving so that you don't have to learn from the all over again every single time. Hopefully it's automatic. And finally, we use information and we retrieve it so that we can then generalize the skill. And a really good example of that is even in mathematics, if I had 9 plus 1 is 10, and I realize that when I add on 1, it's 1 more than the number that it was. So if 9 plus 1 is 10, then maybe 90 plus 10 could be 100, and I'm generalizing a skill from another skill that I've got there. Okay, let's summarize that little working memory cycle. Step 1, you see or hear some information, goes into your working memory and you hold on to it. Next step is you have to use it. So you have to practice and rehearse it. And the more you do that, the more likely it's going to be stored in your long-term memory. That's the goal, get it to long-term. Step 3 is we pull it out when we need it. So once it's sent back to your working memory so that you can use it. So in terms of the simple view of writing, that gives us a lot more perspective of all the things that are going on there with working memory. And if children or young people have a difficulty in working memory, it's going to significantly impact how they can write. So we need, in order for working memory to be free, we need our transcription skills mastered so that they're automatic. We don't want them thinking too much about their handwriting, and we don't want them thinking about the spelling, ideally. And we know that actually, I think there's a lot more children now that have difficulty in this area, and it's becoming increasingly something that children are finding hard to do. So we have to put in routines that enable this to be mastered. Tick working memory, we've looked at transcription. Now we're going to look at executive functioning. Okay, what is executive functioning? Essentially, it's a set of mental skills that help us to plan, organize, remember information, manage our time, regulate our emotions, and control our behavior so that we can achieve goals in life. So they're very, very, very important skills. We can put these skills and we can break them down into 10 sub-skills. We've got planning, organization, time management, task initiation. We've got the working memory, which you've just talked about, the ability to self-monitor, flexibility, the ability to adjust to different situations. And in a classroom, if you think about how well can some of your children adjust when you're away, or do they find that difficult? That is a executive functioning skill. Impulse control, those who can hold information rather than blurt it out. Emotional regulation and sustained attention. Now, sometimes we think about executive functioning skills and we learn about them from a perspective of maybe if a child has ADHD and we've read a report about it and we see, oh, they've got executive functioning difficulties, or it's quite observable. You'll be able to list a number of things in your head of behaviours that you can see in relation to executive functioning. It's usually that when you give an instruction, it's the child that doesn't follow the instruction straight away. Or if you ask them to complete a couple of instructions, like go to your bag and put away your hat and collect your reader and bring it to the table, and they can't follow all those steps. That's an indication of working memory or executive functioning difficulties. What I want to look at today, though, is executive functioning skills in relation to writing. So I've put on the screen here 3 executive functioning skills: planning, organisation, and task and time management. And we've got the 3 definitions here of what we do when we plan. But here, I want to look at it, how planning affects writing. So we need to have good executive functioning planning skills in order to plan our ideas and arguments and structure things before we even get started with writing. We also need planning in order to brainstorm ideas. Organisation skills, we know firstly to keep materials together, but for writing, it's essential for structuring sentences and paragraphs and writing your ideas in a cohesive order. It also is organisation skills help with writing transitions and avoid going on tangents. An example of that would be when somebody writes a story and then it just goes completely in another direction. They haven't been able to maintain the organisation of keeping the main idea and goal that was in their head. And for time management, writing requires you to pace yourself and be able to complete that whole process of plan, draft, revise, and edit. Executive functioning difficulties, you'll drop off and say, I'm done. I don't need to revise and edit. The task is done. And you need to have this skill to prevent you from last-minute rushing. Task initiation is, how does this affect writing? Well, many students really struggle to get started with writing, and this is where you're going to see task avoidance behaviours. It's usually when we ask students to write that you start to see behaviours such as, can I go to the toilet? Can I go get a drink, please? Or I just need to get something, or can I just go and sharpen my pencil? We've talked about working memory in regard to writing. Just as a reminder, it does allow a writer to juggle ideas while writing. So it's keeping the idea in mind, in front of mind, whilst also doing all the construction of sentences and moving them around. So it's critical for revising and holding the original thought together. Self-monitoring helps a writer check for clarity, grammar, and whether the writing meets the goal. And it enables you to spot errors and revise effectively. The last 4 executive functioning skills that we're looking at, we've got flexibility here. So the ability to shift between the drafting and then the revising stage, and also the ability to regulate, and even when you're putting ideas onto a planner. It also supports problem solving when a draft isn't working. Impulse control. So we need to, with writing, it prevents you from rushing through your writing. Any teachers who teach in year 3, 5 or 7, 9, looking at NAPLAN, that you'll notice that impulse control and flexibility, children who finish their NAPLAN very, very quickly, like in the first 10 minutes, have difficulty with this ability to manage their time and complete the tasks. Finally, we've got emotional regulation. Writing can be really frustrating and can actually bring out emotional states for students, and they can become dysregulated just from the process of writing. And knowing that and being able to observe it and say, oh, well, they're having difficulty with their emotional regulation right now, it changes the way, when you look at it through the lens of executive functioning, how you support and even approach that when writing is difficult. And finally, writing is really demanding and requires a lot of time to be able to write, and especially when we get into narrative writing, because narrative writing is a harder thing to write about than previously when I talked in the last webinar about information writing. There's more processes going in place with a narrative task than informative. So that is executive functioning and working memory. And now what I want to do is I want to show you a snapshot of some reading, writing reviews that I would do on a daily basis before I even get into genre and big picture literacy learning. So here's an example of a book that I want to introduce, because the children have just, they're up to, and this is from the Nelson Decodable Readers. This is the online platform. You can see that I'm at level 7.1 here, and I'm looking at the sh as far as me teaching in a scope and sequence here. So what do I need to think about and plan ahead and consider with working memory and executive functioning to ensure that students can access this efficiently and effectively? The first thing I'm looking at here is, what have they just done? They've just done the double F, L, S and Z, which means that they've looked at the floss rule about and looking at when you use these double letters. So I want to put that back into their working memory before I bring in the new information of the sh. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to do a review, and we're going to review our grapheme knowledge and understanding. Now, I would ask the students, we're going to review our sounds and our grapheme knowledge and understanding. Might ask them why we're doing it. I'd be getting in a reciprocal routine response here, and I'd be saying, why are we doing this? And they would be saying something along the lines of, so we can read, and so that we can understand phonics to be able to read words. Once I ask them what the sound is, I don't say anything. So I make an effort to just stop and listen. And ideally, as these are coming up, I'm showing you what I'd be getting them to do, but I'd really probably have cards in front of me, because when I have cards in front of me, I'm looking at my students and I'm watching their mouths and watching if they're looking and paying attention. The other thing I'm looking for and listening to here is their pronunciation. So say we get to the F here and they pronounce it as f. I might correct and say, listen, you said f. You're saying it quite long. I want everyone to say their speech sounds nice and short. Say f. So then I would listen to them say it. Now look and say f. one more on your own. Let's continue. So I'm giving immediate feedback on speech and pronunciation. And the reason I do that is when all children say this in unison, we want the speech sounds to be really short and sharp so that anyone who does have a difficulty with speech sound isn't having repeated sounds being blended in behind and in front of them, because they're going to find it much harder to learn how to map the corresponding speech sounds to the graphemes. So that's the first thing that I would do. I would get them to read and say them. Then I'm going to get them to write them. Now, they could be writing these on whiteboards, but I would want them ideally to move towards having it written so that I can assess and review if they could keep up with the sequence, if their handwriting formation is accurate. And you can see here my learning intention is to connect the speech sounds to their written symbols. So I'm going to say a sound and say the first sound on this page was t, so I might say t, and then I'm going to get them to write t. Once they've done it, I'll get them to stop and wait for me, and then I will write it. And again, I'm modeling my handwriting formation, and my goal for handwriting here is that short letters will fill the space between the baseline and the dotted line. And again, I'm aware that we all have different types of lines that we use. Just remember, as long as you label your lines, I just call this my baseline, I call this one my top line, and I call this my midline. So again, the focus here then becomes handwriting formation as well as making that connection, the reading-writing connection to what the written symbol is, and they're having a go at writing it themselves. They're also seeing me model it. I wouldn't usually model it using a PowerPoint presentation like I am here. What I would probably do is either model it on the board or use a document camera. Once we've done that, I'm then going to, because I've reviewed that double F, double L, double S, I'm going to ask them to read, segment, and blend these words. And then once they've segmented and blended these words, I'll ask them to read the words to me nice and quick to review the previous skill. So I know that I've recently introduced this and I want them to get this to mastery. And the more repetitions we have, the more likely it will go into their long-term memory. I'm then going to reinforce that by asking key check for understanding questions. So here I've got a template that I would use for a check for understanding question, which might be in the word, and I'm going to use the word hill. I might say in the word hill, I can only hear one sound. So even though I'm looking at the word hill, when I say what I'm hearing, I am tuning them into spelling and their transcription skills as well as their reading. Then I say, what is the name of the vowel letter before the double L? And they would say I. And I might say, what sound is the I saying? They would say I. And I really want to reinforce that I compared to the E because that's tricky. And then I'm going to go back to moving that check for understanding question to a generalization that they can then lock in and know by heart as well over time, that if a short word has a single vowel letter that makes a short vowel sound and ends in F, L, or S, which is already 3 pieces of information, then we double the F, L, and S. So you can see that there's a lot of information in that if, but if we teach them the if then they're going to be able to generalize that and know what to do when they hear the short vowel sound when they are spelling. So with that in mind, that makes this a reading and a spelling. Okay, then that's my review. So I've read the graphemes, 1 or 2 minutes, written the graphemes up to a good 5 minutes, and then asked check for understanding questions. We're now going into our learning. So here we have the letter S, and we know that S can say S like in snake or like in hat. But now I'm teaching them that we can put these 2 letters together, and when they're together, they can represent another speech sound that we know is sh. So I'm making this really explicit as we move into our 2-letter graphemes. And once I've done that, I'm going to model the formation and the handwriting of this again. So you can see here that in my initial model, we're learning that 2 letters can say one sound, and the students are going to read words with sh and write words with sh. When I'm teaching this formation, I'm Spalding trained, and part of this is a technique from Spalding where you teach handwriting formation using a clock face. And with this clock face, I actually remove most of the numbers and just have the 2, 4, 8, and 10. And then what I do is I slowly do the formation here. And in a good model, sometimes I like to just let them look at it without talking over the top. Okay. This time I will articulate what's happening during the formation. When I do the letter S, I'm going to start at 2 on the clock and I'm going to go up and around. And when I get to 10, I'm going to turn in and go right through the middle of the circle until I get to 4, where I'm going to turn around again. Right now I'm touching the baseline before I finish at 8. Now I'm going to show you this formation on the lines. So here you can see this is how I managed to get my S to fit in the lines to master my transcription skills. I'm only picking one concept there. The only other thing I would say is make sure your H sits nice and close so that they're learning about positioning and placement as well as starting points. Once we've done that, we're going to start exploring some sh words. So this is the sh book that was on the platform. And what's really nice about this is that they're great books to use when you're introducing a new speech sound and you want to give them some words. So here we go. I'm going to look through this book and go, have a look at this. We've got a shop here. Look at the picture of a shop. Can you all say shop? Let's have a look at the SH in the word shop. Sh goes at the beginning of this word, and I may even underline the SH to demonstrate where it's positioned. And then I would continue. Look at this. We've got the word shed. Listen to the word shed. Listen to me segment it. Shed. There are 3 sounds, but there's 4 letters. And I would carry on with that. This is quite nice that in all of these words, the SH is at the beginning of the word, which makes it easier to hear for anybody who's got phonological processing difficulties. There's 2 or 3 words here towards the end where we've got some more complex graphemes that may not be introduced, but I know in every classroom there's always a few that already know it, so it gives me an opportunity to differentiate. Then we go back to writing sh words. And again, I'm just taking the time here to show you again as many opportunities as I can to model spelling and good handwriting practice so that I'm modeling the formation so that the children can pick that skill up and be able to do it as well. We would then segment and blend, and that would then, just like earlier with the double L, double F, and double S, this would then go into the bank in my working memory of we're going to keep bringing this back until it becomes automatic. All right, what have I just done in this daily review sequences? We've read graphemes, we've written graphemes, we've answered check for understanding questions, we've done some handwriting formation, so we're doing reading, writing, and transcription skills here. And we've also looked at some vocabulary work and looked at SH in words that most of these words they will already know what they are, and they'll be able to use these for their own reading, writing, and spelling. So with that in mind, how does all of this again link to what I was talking about with working memory and executive functioning skills? What have I had to do here? Well, the students have had to retrieve some graphemes from their long-term memory. Then they've had to use them to write. Okay, they've had to use their visual memory to know the starting point of sizing and placement of letters, as well as the position. They've had to have their own knowledge of the routines to listen, learn, and follow directions. The executive functioning skills that they've needed to use is that they've had to know how to get started, how to transition, how to stay focused and listen, how to complete work, and also how to push out distractions so that they stay on task. There might be times in that routine where some children do not hear the speech sound, so they've got to bring themselves back and have that cognitive flexibility to say, I didn't hear that. I might need to skip that one, leave a space and go on to the next one. There is a lot of cognitive processes going on there, and it's all in their head and their hands at this point. So they're very, very busy young people as they're learning to master these skills. So in summary, the reading and writing connection for spelling and reading is important to address in warm-up routines that review information that is not yet mastered and is also about to be used. And by developing these instructional routines, we can enable mastering of our teaching as well as mastery of learning. And we can address this in an instructional model, which is very often commonly called now a playbook, an instructional playbook. Okay, let's now look at writing and the science of narrative writing. In the last webinar, I talked about informational writing, and I'm using this structure here as a bit of a different graphic. That information gives you an introduction, body and conclusion, and in the introduction we have to establish a situation and introduce a topic, and then we just give our information in detail. It doesn't have to be as chronological or sequential, and we're usually regurgitating information that we've just know and learned. In our conclusion, we can just restate the topic. And what you can see here is work that has been put together in a little booklet that the students that I work with put together on writing. And you can see that some of them here, I don't know if I can tune in, they do have some difficulty with transcription, sizing and placement. But even this picture here, this girl could not write at all. Oops, a daisy, I've just gone out. How do I get back in? I think I go, oh, is that right? Yeah, I'm back. I'll try not to do too much zooming. You can see that there's a range of transcription skills here. Some of these children would not write at all 12 months ago or even 6 months ago. And it's by putting in these processes in place that I am now ready to give them a go at narrative writing. So this book I mentioned earlier, Best Practices in Writing Instruction, has a whole chapter on the research around teaching narrative. I'm going to summarize it in 6 parts. What's the purpose? What are the elements of a narrative? What do we need to teach? What's the writing process? What strategies do we need? And how can we support struggling readers and writers? So, purpose of a narrative. Narrative writing helps students express experiences, ideas, and emotions through story form. Narrative can develop creativity, empathy, and communication skills while also reinforcing their literacy skills and writing craft, knowledge and understanding of structure, vocab, and sentence variety. If we look at the elements of strong narratives, similar to the previous model I showed you, we've got here, and it could be a simple narrative, but if we've got a really strong structure, it's got a clear beginning, middle, and end. The beginning establishes a situation, it introduces the characters, which might be a narrator, and the setting. The middle of the story gives you your events. And in a simple narrative, we want the events to be in order, in sequence. And finally, we close it up by finishing the narrative with an ending. That's our simple structure. The core elements of a narrative are that we have the structure, the clear beginning, middle, and end. And on this image, you can see it's around plot. And we can, as narratives increase in complexity, we increase the problem solution and the conflict resolution. We have characters who are relatable, and we like to develop them with thoughts, feelings, and motivations. We need the setting to be both the place and also the time. And the setting can provide context and really build atmosphere in a story. The plot I've talked about with the sequence of events, and a good narrative often reveals an underlying insight or lesson, as well as when we're teaching it, we say the simple purpose of a narrative is to entertain and develop an understanding. Step 3 of the summary from the chapter is the writing process that we need to plan, draft, edit, revise, and publish. There's a big emphasis on multiple drafts, sharing, peer writing, and self-reflection. I think before I really learned about the process of writing a narrative, I thought that drafting was the hardest part of writing a narrative, but really it's the work you do on your plan. Planning and editing and revising should be harder than the actual drafting if you take your time and keep coming back to it and think really deeply about your plan. I think publishing, I don't want to argue with you, Kate, depends on your publishing skills, but I am presenting for a publishing company, but it is depending on your skill set will depend on how high up you need to go with publishing. All right, teaching practices. Just like I showed in the last webinar, in this webinar, you can see I've got a new type of organizer to organize the stages of a narrative. So we need to model and we need to demonstrate our narrative thinking through really good think alouds. We need to have really good texts that demonstrate what we are trying to teach and highlighting different techniques. We want to use consistent graphic organizers that can develop in complexity, but have a systematic and sequential process in the development of the organizer. And this is an SRSD, a graphic organizer with its mnemonics of POW, WWW, which stands for who, when, where. The W2 stands for what happened and then what happened first and then what happened. And then the H2 stands for how did it end and how did the characters feel. So this is what we use to teach narrative. Finally, we really want as many opportunities as possible to rehearse and orally tell stories. The more stories that we can say orally, the better our writing is going to be. Difficulties and looking at how we can improve. We can always elaborate by adding detail, dialogue, inner thoughts, or sensory description. This morning I was working with a student who's in year 9. He had to do a creative response to a task, and when I reviewed it, and the problem was he didn't have enough words in his word count. He did have a good plan and he did have a good sequence. But I was like, if you use sensory description in your second paragraph, you can add in probably 40 to 50 words by saying, what do you see, what do you hear, and what can you smell? So this is where we can really improve on our first draft of writing. We really want to encourage sentence variety for rhythm and flow. We want to develop a really good bank of linking words to build cohesion. And we want to teach students how to zoom in on certain components, like I mentioned earlier, about if you go to this paragraph and we build up the sensory description, you can really create more, not just word count actually, but you can really develop the narrative that goes with it. Supporting struggling writers. This is a girl that I've been working with now for about 6 months. And you can see this is from the previous task on frogs, but what we can see in this task here is there's a bank of words and vocab that she can access to write her sentences. Each sentence at the beginning of the box has a sentence starter so that she's got something to start with. Now, she also, even 3 months ago, her writing was illegible. She's been doing a handwriting intervention in addition to learning how to write and express her thoughts and ideas. And she's now at the point where her writing can be read and understood and shared. So this is a really good example of how we can move students who have executive functioning and working memory difficulties so that they can access writing as well. The narrative chapter talks about a teaching sequence, and it sort of summarizes how you can teach narrative and what it looks like at different stages in school. So in your first year of school, you just want to be writing simple recounts. And a recount is a type of narrative. You're writing about a personal experience, you're the narrator, and you've got your characters, which are usually family members or friends. You can also do that with drawings or labels. Then you want to move into short stories with basic characters and simple settings where you've got a chronological sequence. It's helpful to do repetitive language. Think of a fairy tale like The Gingerbread Man, for example. When you're writing these short stories, a really good goal is to stick to a number of sentences. So maybe between 8 and 12, for example, because that gives you an achievable amount to be able to write in a short amount of time. After the early years, when you get into the middle years, that's when you really want to start developing your plot and having a more complex problem and then a solution. You also want to add in more descriptive language and dialogue and more connected sentences. So you probably want to be starting to see a lot more mixture of simple, compound, and complex. Continuing along the sequence, everything just continues in complexity. More complex plots, more character development, varied sentence types, expand your settings. You might make your setting integral to the story rather than just being a backdrop. And you're going to start writing with themes in mind. By the time you get to secondary school, you will be reading and writing about themes all the time, and you're going to have to be able to use dialogue efficiently, as well as start to use literary devices. So you can see here that there's a lot around symbolism and also being able to use different sort of literary devices as part of the expectation when you're doing creative pieces. So as a research wrap-up, we want to, narrative can foster development of vocabulary. You're not going to get the same type of vocabulary in a decodable or even a predictable reader than what you're going to get in authentic literature. That's where you get the gold. You can get more knowledge and understanding of morphology, sentence structure, cohesive devices, phrasing, grammar, syntax, and finally, it's essential actually in narratives in developing other types of writing. The one big takeaway for me from this chapter was the purpose of a narrative. Even though I teach that the purpose of a narrative is to entertain and develop an understanding, this sentence really stood out to me, that the purpose of a narrative is not simply to engage and entertain, but narratives can also be used to inform, instruct, persuade, present a call to action, and often simultaneously. Again, not so simple view of writing. It's quite incredible what you can get out of a narrative. All right, as far as sorting all of that out and starting to apply in practice, we want to build our knowledge around the narrative genre. So we're going to use that same model I talked about last time about SRSD and the developmental stages. Again, we want to activate and develop background knowledge. We want to have lots of discussion, and modeling is key. Again, you saw the graphic organizer I showed earlier. The more times you use it, the more likely they're going to be able to memorize all those components so that you can support them on a gradual release model to write independently. The SRSD has the power mnemonic, so you want to pick your idea, organize your notes, and then you want to write and say more. And I'm going to show you a couple of decodables now using this framework. So that's the going further. So here I have 3 decodable readers that were on the platform. The ship in the fog I've already introduced and talked about. So it's got the SH and it's got a lot of the double L, double F and double S words in it. So we're starting to look at multi-letter graphemes. My Dog Dom and Pat 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 are very simple narratives. So they don't have any conflict, which is in line with the science of narrative writing that I showed you in the organizer earlier. So I'm going to use My Dog Dom and I'm going to read it and think about all these components here and put it into a table so that I can use it for teaching. And this is what I got. So I'll just give you a minute to just look at the teacher plan. And what you can see here is that I've said, okay, so who is this about? It's about Dom the dog and the boy. When does it take place? Well, it's right now. It's written in the present tense, which is really handy to have texts that are written in different types of tense. And it also looks back to when Dom was a pup. Where does it take place? Inside, on the rug in the bed, and outside in the yard. What happens? There's just a list of things that are observable. Dom lies on the rug. He was a big pup who grew into a big dog. Dom cannot run, but still has fun. He rolls in the mud, digs in the pit. What happens? He has naps. The boy hugs and pats him. How does this end? Well, Dom is the boy's pet and they love each other. It's just a nice little ending of simple life things that actually are relatable. What are the feelings? Dom is a happy, playful, and not sad pet, and the boy is caring, proud, and glad. So my thoughts here are much more complex before I break them down to being decodable again. And this is what I want to put on a graphic organizer. And the point of putting these, I'm going to attempt again to zoom in. And I may have difficulty zooming out, but see how I go. That I am again modeling putting this onto a graphical organizer so that there's more opportunities to write. Okay, I want the children to be able, not for every single book they read, but every now and then I want them to be able to do this to develop their knowledge and understanding around text structure and narrative at a very simple level so that they can go away and write their own. I've done the same thing here with this text, which is called Pat, 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 similar theme with dogs and pets. And there's more characters in this one, so that there's the name of the people, and then some of the animals have not been named, so I haven't capitalized them, but one was, so I gave it a capital letter, which lends to, will I reinforce the idea of capitalizing in this text as my thinking for syntax, grammar, and punctuation as an integrated teaching point. When is it? Now, today. Where is it? What happens? All the way through to how does it end? The character and the pet, she pats it. Okay, it's a very, very simple decodable. And then here we've got, how does the main character feel? Well, we've got glad, which means I'm moving into CCVC. So I might give that as a challenge. Then you can use this as prompts for sentence dictation as a basic skill to build towards. At this stage, I don't really necessarily think I would want the young children to necessarily rewrite a whole narrative here, but what I would want them to be able to take as a bare basic, what are the parts of a narrative? And the more repetition that I do this, again, when it comes time for them to be able to write a narrative, this is all not new information. And we know with all this new information to write a narrative, it would just be too much and they would miss bits. So we want this to be as automatic and intrinsic as possible. Oh, I think I've done it. Yes, I have. Again, so I zoomed out, okay. Yay me. All right, so this is a graphic organizer on the ship in the fog. This is the level 7. I'm just going to click to see if this little video comes up. Again, I'm just reinforcing any opportunity you can, demonstrate the actual thinking and the writing. No, it says it cannot play the media. Okay, I think you know my point. It's a video of me modeling the writing. This story is really good because it has a really good problem. The fog prevents the ship from seeing the cliffs. And even though the language is really simple, don't worry, Kate, it doesn't matter. It's just a little video, I'm not worried. Even though it's a simple text, it's just at the right point in time for these kids to be able to go, now we've got a problem. So you can really sort of reinforce the narrative elements and the structure of a narrative. And there's a lot of big ideas in this text around, how can fog be a problem? How can we solve this problem? What needs to happen? So yeah, I really like this text. That's why I chose it to put on this graphic organizer to demonstrate this. All right, time check. I've got about 5 minutes to go. I'm going to show you a couple more before and a model. So here I'm showing you a book. I actually brought the book with me, but I know how these backgrounds work. Oh, there you go. Zebra came on a boat. You saw it in a flash. There it is. This is a book about a child who came to Australia on a boat. So it's a rich text. And you can see just from looking at how I've rewritten this on the graphic organizer, it's got a lot more in it. So there's more that's been written because I'm applying the same skill with a book. I'm going to teach this book probably around grade 4, 5, 6, and look at all the literary devices that I can get out of this one book. The more I do this, the more prepared the students are, again, with the knowledge of these devices, which they end up having to sort of know by heart and have automatically. What is imagery? What is repetition? Symbolism, pretty tricky idea, but they do get it by the end of school. And what is the effect of this on the reader? So we don't just do decodables. Decodables are there for the function of learning to decode. We want them to be beautiful and engaging, but we also want to use as many other types of text that we can use as well. Okay, so now I'm ready to write, and I know this planning model now, and I want to teach narrative writing with all that background that I've already put on the table. I've got my POW. I'm still not going to make an idea up on my own. I'm going to take a narrative. I took this one this is a PM, it's like level 14, and I'd cut out the text and I gave it and then I use it to say, what's happening in these pictures. So I just want to make a point here that there's a really good writing assessment called the test of written language. And this is exactly what they do. They give you a picture and it's a complex picture with lots going on. So you can see characters, setting, a problem and a potential solution. So even when you're assessing writing, you don't have to say, make everything up on the spot. That can just be way too much cognitive load. So what I've done here is I've taken all this information and I've put it on this graphic organizer. In order to teach this and model this, I need to have my own self-talk and think aloud process. So what I've done here is I'm showing you how I've even picked my idea. I'm saying, okay, first I need to pick an idea. I'll look carefully at the pictures. I can see there's a mother hen with her chicks. Oh, there's a sneaky rat hiding and there's a cat up on the fence. I think I know what's happening. The rat, who I'm going to call Snitch, wants to catch a chick. And the mother hen, I'm going to call her Henny, she doesn't see it, but the cat, I'm going to call the cat Whiskers, she jumps in and saves the chicks. Yes, that's my idea. Good job, me. I picked it. I can do this. Now, what I'm doing here is I am planning aloud, I am self-monitoring, and I am saying positive self-talk to myself. And if you're not in the habit of giving yourself positive self-talk, I suggest planning this out first because it is hard in the moment to be thinking of what you're going to write and then adding on this layer of positive self-talk. I keep going, and as I keep going, I might have another who's in my story. I've got them Henny, I've got the chicks, I've got the character of the rat and the cat. Okay, I'm going to put them on my graphic organizer. When does this happen and where does it happen? I've got a script there ready to go, and then I write only a small amount. I've got the whole script here. If you want this, I've got my email and I can send this to you after the session. But this whole script is needed so that I can model just how hard it is to write a story. I am not just going to give my class a writing prompt and say, off you go, before supporting them to be successful using this process. And finally, I will actually model the writing. I will do this over 2 or 3 sessions to break it up so that it's enough for them to watch and listen and learn. And then again, I'm going to use a Fidelity checklist so that I'm checking my knowledge and understanding that aligns with what were the goals of me being able to teach that narrative. Have I included all the things? Have I discussed all the parts of the model? And that completes that component. I'm just mindful of time here. Okay, so I have now modeled writing a narrative. Putting all this together, we've got what do we know about narratives? They provide insight. So all the narratives that I've shown today, we can take big ideas out of each of them. Sometimes it's the insight that you get from a narrative that give you the opportunities to develop their social skills and relationship skills in the classroom. Narratives are essential for communicating the realities of human life, but they also give us for imagining human possibilities. This matters in the classroom because narratives build students' capacity for compassion, social skills, and perspective taking. And it's why narrative writing shouldn't be the optional extra. It's central to our literacy and also our well-being. So thank you so much for joining today. Today we've looked at the why and the how of teaching narrative writing. We've looked at executive functioning skills, working memory, the frameworks of writing, using SRSD to put it all together. I've looked at some modelling, some self-talk, how to put them onto graphic organisers so that we can use and apply this to teach narrative writing. Thank you for